My husband Brian and I want to share a really interesting part of a journey that we've been on. We've had a lot of amazing experiences, having been able to travel to lots of countries. But this particular story, in a way, it almost found us rather than we finding it. The whole time we were being carried along in a story that had already started, and we just got to enjoy being a part of it for a season.
When I saw Lilius's work, the gift of seeing the glory of God in nature and flowers, it resonated with me.
I don't think anything in my greatest imagination would have ever envisioned the partnership with Brian and Sally.
What is anything when you think of eternity except a means to get there? So laugh at everything and go on in God's name.
Her story is very contemporary to the time that she lived in, but also it's very timeless in the fact that it's people, following their heart rather than what convention might tell them.
From the very beginning, the fact that she went there as a single woman with two other single women was very different.
She was willing to give everything up for her calling.
The fame that could have been hers was not the most valuable thing to her.
You don't see too many people that can make those choices.
It was the first we knew about Lilius Trotter, actually. We didn't know anything about her, so I was whispering to him, be very careful, we don't know these people and we don't know what's going to happen.
I feel like we've been in a sailboat and God was in the wind, moving the sailboat here and there.
It's extraordinary the way that through this kind of energy and effort, things happen, and really quite remarkable.
All this came together at the right time, God's time.
Just gave me chills to think about. God was doing something much bigger than we could even comprehend. It all started when I was on Amazon and I had purchased some books about Amy Carmichael, who was a missionary in India. And Amazon will say, if you like this, maybe you'll like this. So it introduced me to a book called A Passion for the Impossible and another book called A Blossom in the Desert. Both of these books were about a woman by the name of Lilius Trotter. I was looking at A Blossom in the Desert, and it is a story about Lilius Trotter, and it shows a lot of her art and a lot of her quotes. And the very first quote in the front of the book that really drew me in was,
"Take the very hardest thing in your life, the place of difficulty, outward or inward, and expect God to triumph gloriously in that very spot. Just there, He can bring
your soul into blossom." After reading that and seeing the beautiful art in this book and more of her quotes, we really wanted to meet Miriam Rockness, the one who had put this book together.
I met two women, the Barber sisters, in 1986, and they first introduced me to Lilius Trotter, an obscure, unknown Victorian-era artist. Other than being kind of an interesting story, I never thought about Lilius again. And then, several months later, a package arrives in the mail. What was in that package? It was one of those moments that was going to change my life. Looking at this little white book with gold lettering, Lilius Trotter of Algiers, and just the opening sentence.
There lies before us a beautiful possible life, one with a passion for giving that shall be poured forth to God, but spent out for man.
The sisters were getting up in years, so they had decided to divest their library bit by bit. They were giving a little piece of themselves each time one of those mailings came, because they found someone who cared. This was the beginning, for me, of the discovery of Lilius through her writings. Over the next couple years, one at a time, books would come in the mail. Parables of the Cross, excerpts of her letters and diaries. And then One sad day, several years later, comes a note saying, "This is the final book, Between the Desert and the Sea." My quest to learn everything I could learn about Lilius Trotter ultimately led me to publishing 2 books about her life and her work. There were many times I tried to retire Lilius. The books had been written, and it seemed like my part was over.
So we contacted her through a mutual friend and made arrangements to meet for lunch on our way back north. Well, what started out as a lunchtime meeting with her and her husband ended up being a 9-hour meeting in their home.
I don't think anything in my greatest imagination would have ever envisioned the partnership with Brian and Sally.
To me, it was the double punch of not only the art, but it was her words. It's the way she would describe God's glory within the mundane and the simple things. It's really that total package.
It is.
And then you go, wow, and you don't just say, wow, Lilius, but you say, wow, what a God.
Yes.
Through the passion that Miriam had, and through all the work and just the years she had spent in trying to get Lilius's story out by both writing a biography and also this beautiful picture book with Lilius's art.
I ended up sharing my one unfulfilled dream, and one dream that I really had pretty much abandoned is impossible.
And the one dream that Miriam had was that a movie be done on Lilius's life. And so together we decided that a feature-length documentary film needed to be made on her life. The name of that film is Many Beautiful Things, and the narrator is Michelle Dockery from Downton Abbey. There are a couple of incidences that to us were kind of interesting as far as the timing of things. One of them was when the journals were found.
The Edgerton family had these wonderful journals. They had several wonderful sketchbooks.
And she'd been trying to reach Mr. Egerton for over a year, and no one was answering his phone.
She had really persevered in London with very few resources. You know, she had gone as far as she could go.
And he just sat up and said, "Well then, Sally, we've got to get over there right away." And I'm just sort of amazed. The next Thursday, they were off.
Miriam had given us the phone number of the Egertons.
I'm Alexander Edgerton. I'm a great-great-nephew of Lilius Trotter.
And when we first called Alex, he said, I was just looking at my dad's will on the section about Lilius.
Alex said that this is interesting timing because I'm just going up this weekend to start going through all of the important papers and books that we have gathered in the library.
Then he sent us an email, which was devastating.
So there was a danger. There was a danger that the sketchbooks had gone.
So then I did what only Americans are impolite enough to do, and I asked if I could go and snoop around basically with him to see if I could find it.
I was fully kind of involved with the hunt and the excitement of it. You know, they'd come in and say, well, we just ordered this taxi to take us to Surrey. We don't know where on earth we're going. We don't know what we're going to find. And they just turn up there.
And we show up. First, there's like construction going on. These renovators are in the house. I thought we had just come to the end of the journey, you know, that the books, they're lost.
It was just, you know, a chilly, damp day in January.
And there's no heat.
They had brought everything from most of the rooms into this one big room to sort through.
I started looking and Sally started looking.
We just had a window of 3 or 4 hours, I think, that he was going to be there at the house.
I don't want to be melodramatic, but I looked up and there were these shelves and I couldn't reach it, and there was a box.
It was out of reach, just slightly out of reach, so he used something to poke it down. It fell into his arms. He opened it, and there within it were 2 journals of Lilius's wrapped in bubble wrap.
But we knew there were still another 3, another journal and 2 sketchbooks.
What we're talking about, certainly in terms of her journals, this is unique material, so there are no comparables. Nothing has ever been sold before.
Just before Easter, we received an email from Alex, and he said, "I have an Easter present for you." I found in the attic a bag with 2 of Lilius's sketchbooks and the 3rd journal. They survived burst pipes and rats. And he mentioned something to the effect that there was something bigger going on here, that he was just kind of surprised that it felt like this was meant to be.
There's something very special about touching a book that you know somebody you really care about touched.
We were just getting ready for the film director to start filming, and we got an email from her when we were in Boston at a book fair, and she asked us, is there any way we can find the 27 missing letters that John Ruskin sent to Lilius?
I'm Stephen Wildman. I'm Professor of History of Art and Director of the Ruskin Library and Research Centre at Lancaster University. Ruskin is enormously important to the history of culture in the 19th century, the Victorian era, of course. Thanks to his prosperous father, he was a man effectively of independent means, so he could write what he wanted to, he could say what he wanted to. His writing in prose is some of the greatest in the English language.
That was the start of a friendship. What he taught her, she understood instantly and applied in other settings. I mean, I think every teacher, there's nothing that delights a teacher more than a good student, right?
Right.
He instructed her in painting, and these same painting lessons occurred when he would visit her at their home in London. And even in between times, there would be letters in exchange where Lilius would send him paintings and he would critique them.
We don't know a great deal about her visits to him at Brantwood, but judging from his side of the correspondence, it's clear that she was bright enough to engage him and keep his attention over a long period of time.
She treasured those letters, she kept them, and gave them to her closest relative for safekeeping. Unfortunately, they were sold.
I can't even tell you the effort and amount of time that I spent and the leads that were followed, and they all came to a dead end.
We knew that the bookseller who had bought them was from New York and that he had an antiquarian bookstore. But since he had passed away, and his bookstore was no longer in existence. In going through some of those papers, I noticed he had a lot of clients that he sold to, most of them colleges and universities. But the University of Texas in Austin kind of stood out, and the Harry Ransom Center is a beautiful library that I believe this bookseller had helped provide a lot of the books for that library. And I talked to them and explained that we were looking for about 27 letters that John Ruskin had written to a woman by the name of Lilius Trotter. And they said they'd put an intern on it and get back to us in about a week. Well, they got back to us by email within just a couple of days, and the intern had found in boxes these letters that John Ruskin had written to Lilius. So we were thrilled, and we made arrangements to get copies of the letters. We were so excited to be able to share that good news with Miriam.
But Sally Oxley located them before they were sold off into obscurity.
It's extraordinary the way that through this kind of energy and effort, things happen, and really quite remarkable.
I have to admit that after all these years, I really didn't believe we would ever find those letters. Those copies are in her possession, sealed. I don't think she believed that I would wait for her. This is the moment. It's so good to see you.
I've been counting the minutes for this. Hi, Dave. Great to see you too.
And I want you to meet somebody. You notice that I have a letter opener right here. I am ready for this. But Darcy, I'm
Darcy,
Sally Oxley, and Darcy.
Good to meet you. I've heard so much about you and about Brian.
And Darcy has been on this venture with me from the very beginning. So she's a partner, either a partner in crime or a pilgrimage in glory, co-conspirator, or whatever.
Journey, right?
And so this moment, this is just amazing. And I'm just so glad Darcy could be here for the, what would we call it, the opening, the unveiling, or whatever. But come on in, I just can't wait.
It looks like we've had a few peepholes, but we really didn't.
Tell the truth. Did you open this up and receive it?
It looks like it's been
It was very
steamed.
tempting, though.
Steamed it open.
Come on in. Why are these letters so important to me? I think, for one, to perhaps clarify the relationship between John Ruskin and Lilius. Now, you know, stories get going and you never know the veracity of it, but amongst her colleagues was the belief that he had actually extended to her a proposal for marriage. He might have. There's absolutely no documentation of that, but there's a very strong sense that the relationship that Ruskin had with Lilius was a robust, strong, two-way relationship, and if nothing else, I think that the letters will give much more of a sense of the personal aspect of the relationship. Let's see what we have here. Just the few letters that I've looked at start out with "Darling Lilius," "You darling Lilius, where are you to be this summer? Write again directly, please. I can't at all tell you how lovely I think your drawing."
The letters that we have are interesting in their range as much as anything, because some of it is to do with drawing, and you can see there's a kind of little correspondence course going on there.
You show great gain in landscape power in these last two books. I pause to think how, anyhow, I can convince you of the marvelous gift that is in you.
My dear child, you must come and see me. I can show you many little things in no time. I never, help me, Sally, I never wondered as such
Delicious or
a delicious bit of
blotting paper
in all my life. And besides, I want to thank you for praying for me. So we have now Lilius growing as an artist. We have this relationship that clearly was of all importance to her. But there was a challenge, because there were some other things entering into her life. There was kind of a movement taking place, a spiritual awakening among London society. It was a very popular thing for people of means to get involved in volunteer work. This was a time when the fledgling YWCA just getting off the ground, and it was really meeting needs. Lilius's heart was definitely drawn to the poor of London, and particularly to the women. She did things that were actually very dangerous. She would go down to the Victoria Station, and she would minister to the prostitutes and try to get them off the streets and into a place where they could have good food and shelter, but also be trained in respectable, marketable skills.
There are one or two references in his letters where he seems to admonish Lilius for spending too much of her time on good works in London, helping the poor and disadvantaged.
I want to see you and scold you, and I've got a cough and no voice to do it, but if you could come out here to be scolded, I think I could manage it in a feeble manner, and it would do my heart good. So do you ever go and see people except naughty people?
He's perhaps expressing annoyance that she hasn't written for some time, but he's over-egging it and I think playing a kind of word game with her as well. He goes on, all very fine, helping the station girls. That's her work in London. But what will you think of yourself someday, I wonder, for your neglect and contempt and defiance and tormenting and disappointing and ignoring and abjuring of me?
I'm bad enough to be gone and seen to, I'm sure, but of course you won't. But send me a line saying you're
I think
sorry
that's probably simply because she could have been spending that time on her art.
She had a heart of love, and it was a love that transcended any kind of social, economic barrier. Ruskin saw that and admired it, and he encouraged that, but he was beginning to see this as in competition with her art. And of course it was. This was brought to a point of crisis. She's there at Brentwood with John Ruskin. He put to her what her future could be. He believed that he could make her England's greatest living artist. And what he was offering her was the best that he, as the master teacher and the arbiter of art in England, had to offer. He was willing to pour that into her life. But there was one caveat, and that was that she give herself over to art entirely. She understands what he's offering her. And it's speaking to something she loves. She now had the great crisis of her life. And that crisis was, what is the role of art going to be in my life?
I felt as if I'd lived years in those few days, roaming the grounds in distress. I see as clear as daylight now. I cannot give myself to painting in the way that he means, and continue still to seek first the kingdom of God. In all the withholdings of this year, God has been opening a door where he closes a window.
Something was taking place in her life that came so quietly that when the moment of decision came, there was almost an inevitability about it.
I attended a mission meeting in London when at the close someone stood up and asked, "Is there anyone in this room whom God is calling for North Africa?" "It's me," I said, rising. "He's calling me."
It wasn't something she had been looking for or wanting or seeking out. It was something that was happening in her heart.
And she could have come up with 100 excuses not to go. And the first one is simply that the mission boards of that time didn't think she qualified to go because of her bad health.
From the very beginning, the fact that she went there as a single woman with two other single women was very different.
Here were these three women, and you'd almost say they were clueless. They found a home in the Kasbah, which would be the old city, and by many considered the slums. They hardly knew what they were doing or where to go. In 1899, she began to keep a record in page-a-day yearly diaries. What's so amazing about this record is not only is it a written record, but it's a visual record. Sketches, and there were photographs documenting in the minutest detail the dailiness of her life in North Africa.
Oh, we do so long to speak Arabic. The power of talking can only come by being among the people.
Lilius's first contact with the people in the Kasbah was through the children. And she found with little gifts of candies or bonbons, she could win her way right into the hearts of children, and through the children, their mothers.
I said to a sad-eyed woman, "You love that little girl." "Yes," she answered, "I am a widow, and she is my eyes." "That is the way God loves you," I said.
These were women who so responded to the love that Lilius gave them. She became La La Lily, their loving Lilius. She understood the written words took on value by their beauty, the pages in which they were printed, the borders in which they were decorated. And so she brought all that artistic talent to developing materials. And she writes this wonderful picture book for babies. It's a bird book. It's lessons. The title page is, "We love the birds because God loves them. And Christ said, even one of them is not forgotten." He teaches them, and we must listen to their story. So it's the story of the birds. The longer that she was in North Africa, I think the more she began to think in parable. She writes, "A bee comforted me very much this morning concerning the desultoriness that troubles me in our work." In fact, I love to think of that little bee as being almost a little iconic symbol of the work that they all did in Algeria, just moving from person to person, place to place. We have the art and the nature parables that were coming out of her soul, inspired by God's handiwork. His nature was her primer.
Looking on and on, the desert stretched away like a great sea. One looks and feels as if in a dream. The desert is lovely in its restfulness. Everything is so full of God. One does not wonder that he used to take his people into the desert to teach them.
On another trip to England, to London, we had just gotten there, and Brian said, "I feel like we need to go to the house where Lilius used to live and see if we could make contact with the people who live there now." Now, we had gone there on previous trips, but to no avail. When Lilius lived there, it was a 4-story building that was all one unit. Nowadays, it's divided into 4 separate apartments, so there were 4 doorbells to ring.
It was one day soon after Christmas, the doorbell rang. So we have an entry phone. My husband picked up the entry phone.
We explained why we were there and what we were trying to find out.
So I was whispering to him, "Be very careful, you know, we don't know these people and we don't know what's going to happen."
And they came downstairs to talk with us.
They came just in the doorway, and we had a conversation in the doorway, and they told us about Lilius Trotter and their project. By which time, I think we both felt very reassured that they were genuine people, but we hadn't invited them upstairs or anything. Right at the end, or was going to be the end of the conversation, I asked Brian if he had a card, and he produced a card.
And she said, "Brian Oxley, that name sounds familiar."
And I immediately recognized the name as being a very important book collector, which of course is what I do. And then we discovered all these connections that we had, and he's been a customer of the firm where I worked for a long time, for many years. So at that point we did invite them upstairs to our flat for tea, rather belatedly. Then we got talking, and we discovered the connection both with the antiquarian books and also with the church.
And we found out that the gentleman had been a missionary himself in Africa.
It was the first we knew about Lilius Trotter, actually. We didn't know anything about her. So Brian and Sally have given us a book about her now, so we've been able to read a bit more, but it was something we didn't know about the house at all, so it's been very interesting.
And they told us that they were leaving the next day and would be gone on vacation for about a week. So if we hadn't have gone that day, we would have missed them. Through a friend that came from the Netherlands to the United States, he inspired us to enter the Many Beautiful Things into a film festival that was taking place in the Netherlands. It won Best Documentary, and he was able to receive the award for us. It's exciting to see how God is taking Lilius' story to many places in the world. It's been to Italy and to the Netherlands and to the UK through film festivals. One of the highlights for me was getting to show the film to Lilius's family, the Egerton family.
Lilius Trotter was my great-great aunt.
I don't think I really thought very much about her before, so it was quite interesting.
And so she was a name that I heard of, but not very much as a child growing up.
We've got all the albums at Godstone, all her paintings and everything.
We invited Alex Egerton and his family. His mother came, his brother, and some nieces and nephews. Most of them had heard of Lilius, but they just felt like this was an aunt that was very gifted in art.
I think for those who are interested in art and in Ruskin, it will illuminate something that was really unknown to many.
I was very fascinated by it because I know I've been to Ruskin's house, and we used to go up the Lake District most years with a hunt, and so when we had time off we used to go there. We've been to the house once or twice. We discovered this sort of connection, and it was very fascinating, lovely part of the world.
I think it also presents an interesting challenge to many.
Her story is very contemporary to the time that she lived in, but also it's very timeless in the fact that it's people striving, following a dream and doing what following their heart rather than what convention might tell them.
The fame that could have been hers was not the most valuable thing to her.
All of us, I think, struggle with that from time to time in our lives, and actually someone like Lilius is quite an inspiration that she went and did what she wanted to do and what she believed powerfully in.
It reminded me of that quote in Gray's Elegy in a Country Churchyard, where he's talking about all the people buried in the churchyard who could have been famous, but who, for various circumstances in this humble village in Stoke Poges, never made it to fame. And he writes something like, full many a flower is born to bloom unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. And really, Lilius Trotter, who was called Lily by her family, really just typified that very thought, that she had the talent to be recognized very widely, but her talent blossomed in a place where perhaps few saw it.
So when I left school, I went and worked in West Africa. I travelled round Arab Africa, and so I can think, for me as an 18-year-old travelling around by myself in these modern times, how difficult that was, and to think for her as a woman at the time as it was then, particularly having had all these offers and John Ruskin wanting her to be an artist, and it really makes you realise the strength of character of the person, and that's really quite something.
She was someone who, yes, typified the picture she gave herself of the dandelion willing to give all that it has so that seeds might be passed on, and I guess that was her life too, willing to give her life.
Just gave me chills to think about. God was doing something much bigger than we could even comprehend.
She made a decision that almost broke her to make it, but when she made it, she proceeded with what, I'm using her language now, a grand independence of soul. What I see here is a woman who was so in tune with God that she could speak, even in the midst of difficulty, to an absolute abundant joy.
I have spent half a lifetime here, and a tide of thanksgiving goes up to God for the long patience he has borne.
Even though she herself said to the end of her life that she would feel the ache of not having completely developed her artistry. And I've come to believe that it's quite the opposite, that her art actually exploded. When I opened up her diaries, when I saw the pages of her journals, and I saw the exquisite scenes in miniature, and saw those faces light up in front of me, And I realized as I walked the 40 years with her, it wasn't lost in Algeria. If anything, it was fed.
As we think about Lilius's life, the thing that so epitomizes her life was the song called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, written by Helen Lemmel, and she was inspired by Lilius's booklet, Focused. When Lilius was out in a woods one day, there was a ray of light coming through the trees that just so reflected on a small little half-wilted dandelion. She just said it was, this little dandelion was full face to the sun and reflected the light in such a beautiful way. Helen Lemmel had become quite a well-known singer and quite a songwriter. She sang at a lot of large conventions and evangelistic meetings, so much so that she was encouraged to actually go study abroad in Germany, I believe, to develop her voice even more. So she was a very talented woman, and she met and married her husband there in Europe. And as she got older, she developed a disease that eventually she lost her eyesight. She was a very prolific songwriter. I think she wrote 400 or 500 hymns. During the process of losing her sight, she also lost her husband as he couldn't deal with what she was going through. So she had a lot of sadness in her life, but the interesting thing that a song titled Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus would be written by a blind woman. Even though she was physically blind, her spiritual eyesight was great. So these two women, even though they never met, their writings came together to form this song. And when Lilius heard about the song that Helen had written, she added it to her Focus booklet. One very amazing woman that is also part of this story is a woman that also went to Algeria as a missionary in the 1950s.
A long time ago, in a very different world from today's world, and in very different conditions, both in Algeria and in the rest of the world.
But she worked under the same mission organization that Lilius had founded.
Yes, we met some people, some Algerians who remembered her, not very many, because she'd already been dead some time. She died in 1928 and we arrived in 1956. And these people were sort of women in their early middle age who remembered her when they were girls. But they remembered her with much affection, her love, her welcome to everybody. Mostly talking, I think, and also writing. She wrote a lot of things, you know, little leaflets and things, explaining Bible stories. And she also, of course, was a great artist and so illustrated these with beautiful pictures of Algerian life. She understood a good bit, I think, about Arab culture and the way that stories are told and local colour, and she was good at speaking out the local Arabic too. So she was a very good communicator, I'm sure. I mean, she certainly had an insight into the way people thought and how to explain what she wanted to convey in the way that people thought and would understand. Well, when my husband had to leave, there was a whole room full of these writings and journals and things left by Miss Trotter. I thought, well, what can I do with them? You know, I couldn't throw them away. So the only thing really to do was to try to keep a specimen of all the different things that there were there. But, you know, there were one or two things that happened that seemed to make it clear that it was right that I should. First of all, I realized the extent of the archives that were there, and also the Algerian Christians. Other people had been expelled at the same time. The meeting room had been closed down. It was a whole lot all happening at once. You know, if I could stay, it seemed better, really. And someone sent me a text as well from someone who knew nothing about what was happening. and somebody I didn't really know that well, really, in a church in this country where my father was then attending. And they sent me the text, God says to Solomon, I will not leave you until you have accomplished everything that you have to do for the house of God. And I felt, well, you know, that lady didn't know what was happening, and yet God had given her that verse. And I thought, well, it seemed, even though other people were not always agreed, including my own father, who wasn't agreed, it seemed to me that God was saying, stay and finish. We lived for the first 20 years, maybe, in the house that Miss Trotter had lived in. It was like all Turkish houses. It had lots of very beautiful tiles inside. The prayer court had a marble floor. Also, there was a very interesting little room, which was always known as Miss Trotter's prayer room. And apparently they didn't discover it first of all when they moved into the house, but then they found this little room which had been part of the Turkish baths, and it was half underneath the back of the prayer court, and you went down steps to it, and it was completely enclosed. You couldn't see any outlet. This was a little circular room, not very big, and round the top part of the ceiling, which was the bottom part of the dome, there was a text written, which I think Miss Trotter had written, and because this was her prayer room where she used to come. And it was, we do not yet see everything put under him, but we see Jesus. And, you know, I thought that was an amazing text, really, and a statement of faith. But just to see that text written around it was a big inspiration.
I'd just like to share a few quotes from Lilius that might be an inspiration to us today. Walk independently of self and straight to God. What is anything when you think of eternity except a means to get there? So laugh at everything and go on in God's name. She also said about calamity and hard times, I am so thankful too for the signs of God's using these calamities to shake the people out of their apathy. People said of her, we'll never know till eternity how much we owe to Lilius's prayers. The last years Miss Trotter has lived the life of a complete invalid, yet sustaining and inspiring every soul that entered her room. Her room was full of light and hope. Long service in a hard field had only driven her in upon the deepest sources of hope. Her losses, the lowering of earthly lights, the loss of comrades, loss of freedom of movement, which was dear to her, all this left her only more conscious of heavenly light. Her very face betrayed it, a shining face as of one who had seen God. Lilius lived out the life that she spoke of. She lived it out in love and light and joy. Lilius's life inspired the song that has been passed down through generations, the song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus.